This is called hedonic hunger. It is defined as the drive to eat for pleasure rather than satisfying that physiological hunger, those energy nutrient needs. This can happen for, it might be enjoyment or satisfaction from like eating itself. It might be our brain's reward system, dopamine, right? Like there's pleasure and motivation and all of these things and these neurotransmitters that happen when we eat. What's interesting is that hedonic hunger can override homeostatic hunger. So again, we might feel like we're totally full, and yet we have this second stomach that seems to appear and we're continuing to eat. Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host and health coach, Jenn Trepeck, with you every week for Wellness Without the Weirdness. And I have a new voice for you joining us this week. My friend Lori is here. Lori, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. This is going to be fun.
It is. It's official. Like a longtime listener, first-time caller, right?
Exactly.
So I'll just fill everybody in. So we know each other from business networking things. So shameless plug for Lori. She's an incredible interior designer and decorator. She also knows like all the non-toxic clean home things, which is amazing. So if that's up your alley, reach out to me. I'll connect you to Lori. So anyway, today, yes, of course. So today is all about the curious case of hunger. And I say it that way because so often we think of black and white, like it's hunger or cravings or nothing, and I don't know if, you know people like this, Lori, but I also see people who are, I almost hesitate to use this word because it seems dramatic, but they're scared or afraid of being hungry.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, I have a very good friend who grew up in Russia and they were very poor. And so if we go out to eat now, he finishes everything because it's so ingrained in him, he doesn't know when the next meal might come.
Yeah.
And so, we carry memories with us, right? For me too, it's like a craving. My mother would always crave caramel popcorn every fall. Now I crave caramel popcorn every fall. It just like it's clockwork. October hits and
yeah, we're going to talk about that. It's so interesting. And I think the other thing, similar to your friend, I think from years of dieting and restriction, there's a fear around being hungry of like, what would I eat if I was actually truly super hungry?
right.
Like we might lose our sense of control. So today, we're going to remove that fear. Because I think it's all about, frankly, better understanding hunger. And just like we talked about this with our emotions, right? By giving words to it, by having a vocabulary around it, understanding different types of hunger, we can change the conversation about it. Not just the conversation we have with other people, but the conversation we have with ourselves about it.
In our own heads.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's interesting because I've seen types of hunger described as like physical hunger, eye hunger, taste hunger. And I'll be honest, I don't find those classifications very helpful.
No, I would agree.
Right? So instead today, a little preview, we're going to talk about these are the types of hunger that are on my list.
Okay.
Homeostatic hunger, hedonic hunger, emotional, conditioned, hidden, and toxic hunger. So we're going to talk through all of those. And frankly, I'll bet you didn't realize that there were that many types of hunger. And frankly, there's probably even more. These are just the ones that are really on my radar that kind of, I think for the most part, cover the gamut. before we get too far into it, we have to tell our members what they're getting this week. Mm-hmm. All right, so members, your recipe this week is for orange juice barbecue chicken. So it's grilling season. And I mean, you could make this one on the grill or not. Instructions are included for both. And you're going to make your own barbecue sauce. I promise you it is easier than you think. And then you can pair this chicken with your favorite veggies, throw it on a bun, or just honestly right on a plate. This is a great one. And then also because it's June, the third month of the quarter, it's time for your quarterly live Q&A. That's a one-on-one, just you and me. So if you want this recipe or a one-on-one mini health coaching session, be sure you're a member. Go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries. For just $10 a month, you get weekly recipes, a monthly article or tool, extra discounts from me and our partners, plus access to live Q&A sessions. It's a total deal. I say it all the time. It's a steal when you take advantage of the full offerings because you save far more than that $10 cost. It's a no-brainer way to show yourself that your health is a priority. Plus, being a member supports this podcast and this community so we can continue to bring you new episodes every week. So remember, all you have to do is go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries or click the link in the episode notes because that's easier. Once you're there, you're going to click, there's a little tiny I agree button, and then support now, enter your email and payment info, click subscribe, and you're all set. You're going to get this week's recipe for the orange juice barbecue chicken and details to schedule your quarterly live Q&A. That's a one-on-one mini health coaching session for you. All right. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, it's super deal.
Yeah, for real. I mean, everybody tells me to raise the price. I'm like, we're going to leave it as is. So, friends, take advantage. All right. I feel like we should preface this by just saying, I think sometimes too, as we were talking about before with hunger, people can feel like hunger or cravings are like this moral failing.
Right.
Like we put all this weight on this thing. And frankly, what shifted everything for me was recognizing that the body only has so many ways to communicate with us, right? Yeah. Hunger is one of those ways of communicating.
Absolutely.
So the point of this episode is for us all to better understand this language of the body, to better understand this communication so that we can then, be on the same team as our body, right? So let's start with, I think, what most of us think of as hunger, which is homeostatic hunger. So this is like that biological drive to eat, to replenish energy. Right? So whether that's, they also talk about it in the context of like metabolic balance and nutrients and nutrition to avoid all of these, health issues and things like that. But frankly, homeostatic hunger is that physiological drive to eat based on a need for nutrient replenishment or energy.
Makes perfect sense.
Right. And so to understand that, I think we want to think about those signals, right? How do we identify this homeostatic hunger? So for some people, well, first of all, there's a lot of hormones involved in this, right?
Of course.
But, yeah, right. But the piece that I think is more practical is for us to understand our own signs, or maybe they're symptoms, right, of hunger. So for me, like my earliest sign is that I sort of can't really concentrate. I get easily annoyed, like I'm trying to work on something. I get easily annoyed by the buzzing of the phone that interrupts me. Like it's a little more sensitive, I suppose, as like the first signs. And then, of course, we also understand, many of us get to that point of hangry, like we're ravenous and so hungry. Lori, what are your sort of like first signs of knowing that you're hungry?
Well, I exercise first thing in the morning, and I always exercise before I eat because I'm just a person. I can't exercise after I've eaten. It just doesn't settle well with me. Low energy when I'm trying to do those. I can tell a difference right away that the day before I did not get enough nutrition. And so then my body after exercise, but that's my first indication. But I know all about the hangry.
Yeah.
It's a real thing, and it definitely runs in my family. So much so that I had a niece getting married, and the presider actually had a little snack bag under her chair, and he says, "I know this is a concern, so I just want to make
Yeah.
sure the bride is good."
Right. Totally. I mean, and for some people, it's, brain fog or a headache, or, especially as we sort of get further into hunger, it might be a little bit of lightheadedness, or their hands might get shaky. Right. So I think one of the really helpful things is to identify our own signs of this hunger, this homeostatic hunger, from the earliest signs, right? Like I'm starting to get annoyed by things, to, maybe shaky hands, lightheaded, or hangry, right? Like there's even a range in there. But for us to know what our own first signs of hunger are, because they're different for
Absolutely.
everybody.
Yeah. And the other thing that I find, sometimes I'm dehydrated, but I feel like I'm hungry. And so my first go-to is a glass of water. Is this really hunger, or is it thirst that my body's trying to cue me in on? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's another one. I often notice I'm thirsty when what I'm craving is fruit or something that's like juicy almost.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we can learn to sort of make sense of these things. And to that point, right? Like I was saying, when I'm thirsty, what I think it feels like is this craving for fruit. So let's talk about cravings for a second versus hunger so that we can kind of understand the difference. Hunger is more general. A lot of things will sound good. Like, when you're really hungry and you sit down at a restaurant, you look at the menu and you're like, I can't decide.
Yes.
We're really hungry. We are truly stomach hungry, needing energy and nutrients. Cravings tend to be more specific.
Agreed.
It's a specific food or a specific type of food where something else isn't really going to cut it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like I'm walking down the street and I see pastry, and it's just kind of like I can walk by it most days, but then before I even get anywhere where there's pastry, it's on my brain. Then I know it's a different thing. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's interesting because the technical definition of craving is essentially a series of chemical reactions in the body that create this intense desire for a specific food. And there's a lot of parts of the brain involved, right? Like we see the food and then we're like, oh, now I want the thing. And some of these things carry into these other types of hunger that we're going to talk about. So even just recognizing, right, even being able to then decipher craving from hedonic hunger or craving from some of these other things that we're going to talk about. And so even learning for ourselves to identify some of these things, is this a craving for something? Will something else cut it, right? Are the only things I'm looking for, these higher glycemic, really specific things so that we can, again, continue to decipher, I'm looking at my notes. There was an interesting study. So it's titled Changing Perceptions of Hunger on High Nutrient Density Diet, published in the Nutrition Journal. So it's a peer-reviewed publication. And basically, what they found in this study is that hunger pains were experienced less often on a high nutrient density diet. And you all know I don't love the word diet, but eating nutrient-dense foods minimized hunger pains. So it's why when I work with clients, we see very early on that a lot of their cravings simply disappear. Right? They end up with a lot more control in their day because they're sort of not at the whim of, these blood sugar spikes and drops.
Right, exactly.
So also in this study, discomfort between meals or upon a skip meal was experienced less often in a nutrient-dense, plant-forward diet. 80% of respondents reported that their experience of hunger changed upon following a high nutrient density diet. Duh, right? Irritability and decline in mood were experienced less often, and a nutrient-dense, plant-forward diet was associated with more feelings of hunger in the mouth and throat and less in the head and the stomach. So again, just sort of starting to pay attention to where are we noticing these signs? Where are we experiencing these things? And what is it communicating? And if you feel like you're on this roller coaster, maybe the simplest place to start is focusing on, dare I go an episode without saying it, protein and fiber at every meal so that we can get those nutrient-dense foods and then see what we notice.
I think it's true because I find that when I do have a craving, generally it's, low glycemic. And so it's something sweet for me. And so, recognizing that that's what it is and how to correct that before I go diving into, a piece of cake or chocolate or, what have you, and realizing where that deficiency is in my body. But it was so interesting how you categorized it between hunger of mouth and throat and of mind. And I'd never thought about it in that context before.
Yeah. And those are part of, some of the other categories of hunger that I don't love as much as these. But if we think about those in terms of our signs of hunger, where are we noticing that? I think it's more helpful.
Right.
In that way. And for everybody too, a lot of the times the things that we're experiencing of hunger or cravings can come in response to restriction. So if we're dramatically restricting, or we are feeling like we're focusing on those nutrient-dense foods, but end up eating a lot of those things that are healthier versions of something. Mm-hmm. So if a lot of our fiber is coming from the low-carb breads or the low-carb tortillas, right? Or low-carb cereals, right? If we're using a lot of these tools that are becoming the majority of our nutrition, I see this happen with that too. So going back to looking at actual food, right? These nutrient-dense, from the earth foods that can shift all of this.
It makes sense. It seems like cravings start for me if it's, like a super busy week. Instead of sitting and having lunch, I'm grabbing the protein bar on the run, which then I never feel like it's an actual meal. And then I get caught at the end of the day and I feel like I'm starving and everything's got to, even though I've really had enough calories, but I didn't take that break. So my brain didn't feel like it got lunch. And then I'm off to the races come dinner. I'm like, everything looks good and I have to have it all, right?
Yeah. So that might tie into, I'm sort of, as you're saying this, I'm thinking in my head, that might tie into emotional hunger. It also might tie into what we're going to talk about next, which is hedonic hunger. Mm-hmm. So, the thing where, like I say this about French fries, right? Where it's like, well, there's always room for a couple fries, right? Or when people say, there's always room for dessert.
Right.
And it's like, you might be totally stuffed. And then it's like all of a sudden a second stomach appears and you're like, sure, I'll eat all the things, right? This is called hedonic hunger. It is defined as the drive to eat for pleasure rather than satisfying that physiological hunger, those energy nutrient needs. This can happen for, it might be enjoyment or satisfaction from like eating itself. It might be our brain's reward system.
Sure.
So, dopamine, right? Like there's pleasure and motivation and all of these things and these neurotransmitters that happen when we eat. What's interesting is that hedonic hunger can override homeostatic hunger. So again, we might feel like we're totally full, and yet we have this second stomach that seems to appear and we're continuing to eat. And so part of the things that I think are worth recognizing, like we almost talked about a little bit already, that the nutrient density of our foods can impact hedonic hunger. Eating the ultra-processed foods, the highly palatable foods, because they are, higher in sugar, fat, and salt. These can stimulate hedonic hunger. Fundamentally, some people have a genetic predisposition to hedonic hunger, to also that like food and reward system. This can also be connected to stress and boredom and some of these other things that we experience every day that can sort of trigger that hedonic hunger. Like we're seeking that pleasure, we're seeking that comfort. And so I think a lot of times hedonic hunger is when people get into that shame and blame and beating themselves up.
Yeah, I treat it more like it's a treat, right? I have this craving. And for me, I've learned to honor it, in a way, but it's a treat. And I'm much better off if once that craving hits me to go get a small portion and have it, and then it like goes away. But if I'm like, no, I don't need that. No, I don't need that. And for weeks on weeks, I'm telling myself, no, I don't need that. Pretty soon I'm diving into a big piece and I still don't feel like I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that ties into this piece too. We want to distinguish, like, eating for enjoyment is not the enemy either.
No.
Right? Eating for emotional needs is frankly not the enemy either. It becomes, what's the balance of that in our lives with eating for other reasons? How much? And then we can also talk about, what are we eating when those moments show up? And there's a way to approach that is healthful and balanced versus compulsive hedonic eating.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So it's, as always, right? It's the gray area. It's not so simple. But some of the things that we can do with, around hedonic hunger is sort of what you were talking about with the protein bar, of being present when we are eating.
Exactly.
Paying attention to how hungry or satisfied are we? I'm pretty sure we have a nutrition nugget on hunger ratings that is another tool that's kind of plays into this, where we make it a practice of checking in with ourselves and giving words to what these things feel like. Thinking through, how often are we eating these ultra-processed, highly palatable foods? Because it is not a coincidence that once you pop, you can't stop on the Pringles.
Right.
So those foods trigger the hedonic hunger. If we minimize those foods, we can inherently very quickly minimize the hedonic hunger and then start to notice when these other moments show up, right? And address those. Finding alternatives, like I talk about non-food related rewards. So that's another place where we could start to shift our experience of hedonic hunger when we offer ourselves rewards that aren't sort of reinforcing that neural pathway, right? And then, of course, stress, sleep, all of those things kind of play into all of that. And I think it's just worth repeating: salt, fat, and sugar, and then processed or highly processed salt, fat, and sugar exacerbate or trigger the hedonic hunger. So similar to calorie restriction, eating these more processed, healthier versions where it's less calories but seems like we're getting these things, right, can actually exacerbate some of this hedonic hunger.
It would make sense because
yeah.
your body's just not getting the actual nutrients it needs. And so then you have a tendency to overeat on the processed stuff because your body's still not satisfied. Yeah.
Right. It's that satisfaction piece. It's that the food that it is getting are triggering these, pathways and these ultra processed foods. Like, frankly, I love some of these healthier options. We all have them. But depending on how much we have of them, it's potentially giving our bodies more of these things that create this hedonic hunger. So it goes back to minimally processed, nutrient-dense choices so that we can then see where this hedonic hunger shows up and have a different sense of control around it. So we have 4 more types of hunger to get through, but let's pause here to highlight our partner for this episode. Big thanks to Layered Jewelry for supporting Salad with a Side of Fries. The modern woman is multifaceted, taking on many important roles in the various aspects of her life. Inspired by her own multi-layered life as a busy mom, trendsetter, entrepreneur, and influencer, Amber Ridinger McLaughlin set out to create a line of luxury jewelry that lets women create their own unique style and create their own beautiful layers. Layered is luxurious and affordable, the perfect combination for the modern woman. Layered allows you to mix, match, stack, and layer pieces that make you feel empowered and beautiful. Each piece is handcrafted to be unique and exquisite just for you. So I just mentioned non-food related rewards.
Great.
NFRR, if you will. I think jewelry is a perfect one. So maybe you go for the Justine paperclip bracelet that's just $66.50. The Candace tennis bracelets, $149.95. My personal favorite are the rings. Like, they have stacking rings and statement rings starting at just $46.95. So all these pieces and prices are before your 10% off and free shipping for being a Salad with a Side of Fries listener. So simply text the word layered, LAYERED, to 844-947-4846. You'll receive the link and coupon code right to your phone. Again, simply text the word layered, LAYERED, to 844-947-4846 to get this handcrafted, luxurious, yet affordable jewelry at 10% off and free shipping. This is a toll-free number. Standard text and data rates may apply. All right. So the next one, we've kind of danced around a little bit, Lori. This one is emotional hunger. And emotional hunger is when we might call it emotional eating. We are, sad, stressed, lonely, right? It could be any emotion. And then we eat either to numb that feeling or to make us feel less alone, right? That the food becomes the companion, the food becomes the comfort, the food becomes that thing. And I think there's an interesting cycle to this, right? Because so what typically ends up happening is that something upsets us. We have this overwhelming urge to eat. We eat more than we really need. Sometimes eating anything is more than we really need, depending on where we are in that homeostatic hunger piece. And then we end up feeling guilty or powerless around the food, which feeds back into something that's upsetting, right? And so we end up in this cycle where we feel out of control, but it's really that we're using food to fill a non-food need.
Yeah. We're substituting, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, in my business, and I think everyone's daily life, right? The amount of stress anymore is unbelievable. And so how do you manage it? And for me, it's always been exercise. That's why I'm a big proponent of get up right away in the morning and get at it. But I find myself, if I'm on the phone and it's something stressful, something's not getting to the job site when we need it, or there's a problem or concern at the job site, I find myself up, walking around and heading to the refrigerator, opening the refrigerator as I'm talking on the phone. And then in my head, I'm going, are you really hungry? No. shut the refrigerator.
Right.
This is not what it's about. It's about this call. Yeah.
Right. It's so interesting. I remember years ago, so I still see my same therapist in Michigan because I'm like, I'm not starting over.
Right.
And I've been in New York for 20 years. So, whatever. I'm not starting over with someone. But so I've been working with her over the phone for like 20 years, right? There were times, I mean, this hasn't happened in a long time, but there were times years ago where we would hang up the phone and I'd feel this intense desire to eat something.
Interesting. Yeah.
Or, maybe when I first started going to, like I'd leave there, come home, and then want to eat something. So it's the first piece with emotional hunger is frankly even just noticing that it's happening.
Yep.
And this goes back to, we've talked about this in our Bullseye of Change episode, and in a lot of these where we talk about there's a process of behavior change. And so right now, the thing that you might do is just recognize that you're emotionally eating. Fine. And then in time, you might say, you know what I eat, I might notice that I'm emotionally eating. And so I'm going to choose to eat something that actually has nutrients when I do this. And then over time, we might progress to some other choices. One of the best questions my therapist ever gave me was when you notice this happening, ask yourself, where am I not being fed?
Nice question.
Where am I not being fed? So when you said, Lori, you eat the protein bar and you're sort of running around all day and then you get home at the end of the day and you feel like you haven't really eaten anything, even though you've had protein and nutrients throughout the day, there's a piece of I'm needing, right? What's not being fed is relaxation. What's not being fed, exactly, the pause, the decompress, the quiet.
Right. And like you say, concentrating on what you're eating, enjoying it, tasting it, right?
Yep.
I've got young, great nieces and nephews, and that's part of the thing is, I talk to them while they're eating like dessert. Isn't that delicious? What do you taste? I want them to think about it rather than just shoveling it into their mouth, right? Because I have to remind myself to do the same thing, really taste it, enjoy it. Then it's much more satisfying. But yeah, if I'm running around and I'm grabbing those nuts or bars or apple, whatever it is I'm carrying with me that day, knowing it's going to be crazy, it's just not satisfying because I'm not paying attention to it at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so when we can identify some of those things, right? Like, I actually need to pay attention to this, or what I really need is that, right, the break, the relaxation, whatever it is, then we can say, all right, I'm actually going to drink a glass of water and go for a walk. I'm actually going to play with my dog. I'm actually going to read a book, listen to some song that lights me up, right? There's a lot of things. And we've talked about emotional hunger in a lot of episodes that you can play with some other tools around that. But even just over time, learning to experience our emotions and sit with them is a whole thing, and we'll get there, but that's a practice too. All right. So that was emotional hunger. So we've had homeostatic hunger, hedonic hunger, where we talked about cravings too, emotional hunger. Now I want to talk about conditioned hunger. So conditioned hunger, think of like Pavlov's dogs, right? It's this, we learn this connection between a stimulus and a response, right? So there's this trigger, whatever the stimulus, and the response is hunger. So, Lori, for you, it's a little bit of that like fall season, the caramel popcorn.
Right. Exactly. It's just every year. And I don't even think about it until all of a sudden it just pops into my head. And then it's like, I can't get rid of it until I actually satisfy it. It just like it will hang on for weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. but definitely conditioned from my mom. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think there's a piece of this too that I see a lot with people. It's also learned overeating. So are there certain people or situations where we overeat? Is it certain holidays? Is it, certain family members or certain restaurants? Right? Like think about all of the different things around us that can trigger, the response of additional hunger or overeating or eating things that we don't necessarily want or need. Maybe it's triggering that hedonic hunger, right? Like all of these are sort of related in different ways. But I do see that this conditioned hunger happens a lot around holidays, around certain restaurants, around old stuff from childhood or family. And so one of the biggest things that we can do is recognize, what is that stimulus, right? Is it a time of day? Is it a location? Is it a scent, right? Or you mentioned, seeing the pastry shop. Is it, right? Like what are some of these stimuli or cues? And then there can also be internal cues. Like we talked about with the emotional ones, right? Is it stress? Are we bored? Right? And how much have we drawn these connections? And again, just recognizing, oh, this is what's going on, right? Like I don't suck as a human. It's not a moral failing. It's like, oh, this actually makes sense. And now that it's intellectual instead of emotional, right? Different sides of the brain, we can address it differently.
Absolutely. For me, we had to eat everything on our plate because there are children starving somewhere. And so you could not get off of the table until your plate was absolutely clean. And I still carry that with me. People are always like, do you always eat everything on your plate? Yes, I do. And I realized long ago, this is what I do. And so I try and take smaller portions because I know me and I have a hard time walking away from it. Now, if there's something that I've ordered and I just don't like it, no problem. I can leave that behind. Yeah. But if I'm enjoying it, it tastes good, I struggle with walking away from that plate if it's not completely gone. And I have to remind myself, it's a learned behavior, right? And I do have a choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And the 3-bite rule might be really helpful in those situations, right? The first, the second, the last. We're going to taste them, enjoy them, and onward.
Yep.
Building up that tool belt. All right. These last 2 types of hunger are probably new to people. So this one is called hidden hunger. And this is essentially when your cells are starving for nutrients. This is a micronutrient deficiency, and technically it's usually a combination of micronutrient deficiencies. The research shows it particularly around iron, zinc, iodine, and vitamin A. And essentially this happens when people, for an extended period of time, right, the majority of their nutrition becomes these calorically dense, energy dense, nutrient deficient foods. Again, it's those highly processed foods. We see this a lot in food deserts, in countries of the world that are lower and middle income countries, where, their reliance on some of these nutrient dense foods doesn't really exist. They don't have them.
Right.
Or in our modern world, right? We're eating a lot of these things that seem like healthy alternatives, right? But they have a lot of these additives or highly processed foods where if you look at the calorie count of the day, you're hitting your calorie marks, right, but we're not getting the nutrients. And it's not just the protein, fiber, quality fat, macronutrients. It's the micronutrients of the vitamins and minerals. And this creates actual health impairment, right? So we see when this happens for an extended period of time, particularly in the research, when they look at countries or marginalized communities, what they see is impaired physical growth and development, right? In children in particular, increased risk of infections. So there's a weakened immune system because the body isn't getting the nutrients it needs, and therefore it's more susceptible to infections, right? We're not supporting the immune system or gut health. There's reduced cognitive function. So it can affect the brain function and even our cognitive abilities when we don't have the nutrients. And that makes sense, right? Vitamins and minerals are imperative for, neuron signaling. And then, of course, increased risk of chronic disease. We talk about this all the time, especially with, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Like, those are known connections to nutrient deficiencies. Again, not just the macronutrients, but the micronutrients.
Right.
So thinking about nutrient-dense foods, closer to nature foods, actual food rather than food-like substances. And I think what's particularly interesting is, if we look at over the years in our food systems, part of how our food systems tried to address this was like food fortification, right? They're adding back vitamins and minerals to flour. Like, I see this a lot with flour and with cereals, right? It's enriched flour, or, right? And then, so like our system has tried, right? Like, we see the, vitamin D in the milk or whatever it is. Like, these aren't naturally occurring things,
right.
So, but yet, notice, we still have all of these deficiencies. So in my mind, and, the way I operate, this isn't solving this problem. But when we think about for our daily lives, right, choosing more of these actual whole foods and recognizing, are you continuing to eat because your body is saying, I need nutrients, right? Not just the macronutrients, but those vitamins and minerals, right? Hydration is about more than just water. It's those minerals too. So just taking stock, I think understanding this hidden hunger that's coming from a cellular place can be really enlightening.
Absolutely. Because, I think, again, it kind of goes back to if I feel myself, really struggling to concentrate, I'll think about, what did I eat yesterday? And what didn't give me, that cognitive energy that I need today to concentrate on what I'm trying to do here. I often kind of go back to what was yesterday, Yeah.
Yeah. So last one is toxic hunger. So this is a concept from Dr. Joel Fuhrman, and it's essentially the idea that modern American lives, right, typical Western diet these days, eating the high-calorie processed foods with the oils, sweeteners, right, all of these things that are low in phytochemicals and other micronutrients, right? These essentially not eating the nutrients results in inflammation, oxidative stress, and accumulation of what he calls toxic metabolites, right? Like we've even in the news and everywhere, like microplastics have become this like major thing that everybody's talking about right now. So we end up with all these toxins that the body then needs to eliminate. That elimination can cause uncomfortable symptoms, right? It's those metabolites, like the waste, the toxins building up in our system from eating poor quality food choices. The body then attempts to move them out. And his thing is that some of these sensations or symptoms of detoxification and withdrawal from unhealthy nutrition, lacking these nutrients, is toxic hunger. This idea that the toxins in our system create this toxic waste that being mobilized for elimination makes us feel hungry. It makes our digestive tract feel empty. We start to feel uncomfortable, and we're eating to reduce this discomfort.
It's so interesting because I've never thought about, obviously, waste is just part of the whole digestive system. But it also makes you wonder how much of that toxic waste our body is trying to get rid of is also pulling nutrients out of our body at the same time.
Yep. A lot of that, too, can happen when we try to use certain kinds of supplements, because depending on what they are, and even pharmaceuticals, depending on what's happening, right, they can pull out the stuff we need with the stuff that we don't need.
Right. Because things aren't getting absorbed into the body. And I wonder, too, how many of those microplastics are keeping from nutrients actually even being absorbed in our bodies.
Yep.
Yeah. Whole different science.
Yeah. Right. So he talks about some of the signs of or symptoms of toxic hunger: headaches, lightheadedness, shakiness, right? A lot of the same things that we talked about noticing from potentially homeostatic hunger. So it looks very similar. So then we want to start to look at, well, what are we eating, right? Do we have a lot of fatigue? Do we have this inability to focus? Are we really irritable? And what are we eating to then start to decipher what's happening, right? But in particular, this toxic hunger can really contribute to a whole host of other health issues, right? Because when the body is overburdened by the toxins, and then we're sort of adding to it more food, potentially more calorically dense, nutrient deficient food, it's like adding insult to injury. So Dr. Furman says, part of the antidote is nutrient dense foods, right? Minimizing this toxic hunger, minimizing the toxic burden, paying attention to all the places where we're getting toxins in our lives, and learning to distinguish what's the body's need for true nutrients from the body's attempt to eliminate these toxins. So interesting, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting how with each type of hunger, we keep coming back to the nutrient-dense foods to help balance it. Yeah. So
yeah, it's kind of a wrap-up thought. That's exactly what I was thinking. Is like the common thread here is not just learning to understand all of this, learning the language of the body, to recognize that there's nothing wrong with us, that all of this is to be expected. All of this is always the body doing what it's learned to do, right? What it knows to do. So I think it helps us understand, right? There's no need for fear around feeling hunger or shame, but that understanding it allows us to make different choices. And fundamentally, all of this moves in a healthful direction when we focus on nutrient-dense, whole, real food, right?
Yep. So I'm ready for our farmers markets to open.
Right. Exactly.
I'm very anxious. Yeah.
Awesome. Lori, any other final thought to wrap it up?
Well, it's been extremely educational, all the different types of hunger. I never really gave much thought to it like that before. Now I know kind of the different areas of hunger that keep, after me all the time. And so, yeah. And it's funny because I can map it back to what did I eat the day before or what have I been eating? And okay, I need to step up my game here, yeah.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
Interesting. Thank you so much.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, friends, to preview our nutrition nugget for Friday, this week's bite-sized bonus episode is all about semantic satiation. Don't make me say that 10 times fast, but this is a tool for removing or changing the emotional charge or our personal connotation from words or to words. It allows us to reclaim some of these words. So if the word hunger, right, like we've talked about today, if the word hunger makes you uncomfortable, or the word bikini, or even different contexts of life, the word salary or negotiation makes you a little uncomfortable, you can use this tool. So we're going to get into it on Friday in this week's bite-sized bonus episode, Nutrition Nugget. So be sure, wherever you're listening, click the plus sign or the follow button so that your app will alert you when it is live on Friday morning. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. I love hearing from you. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your health coach. Lori, thank you again for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. How much fun this has been.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
I have new tools.
Yes, exactly. So until next week, remember, understanding hunger is another way we're learning the language of the body. We don't have to fear it. Rather, we have to learn the range of it and practice deciphering so that we can work with our bodies instead of fighting against them. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.